Welcome everybody to Honey Bee's Symposia series, the first in our 2026 year. We're in our fourth year, so bravo that you guys keep supporting us and evidently want more content. And here we are supplying you with a whole new year of four interesting programs. My name is Steve Rogenstein. I'm your host today and Honey Bee's project director. And we are going to hear today about a project that we worked on for a number of years, which in the end is a source of pride and accomplishment. With a team of 14 bee scientists, we reassessed the IUCN Red List status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe, and that resulted in a new classification, which we'll talk about today. We've assembled some of the players in that work who will provide context as to what is IUCN, its red list for threatened species, the process, challenges, and rationale of the reassessment, as well as during the panel discussion, what some implications and possible next steps might be. To start, I'll briefly introduce Honey Bee Watch for anyone who's new. We're an international coalition tasked with better understanding the biological, behavioral, and environmental factors that bolster survival among free-living honeybees. And by free living, we mean bees that have chosen where they want to live, whether that be in trees, in log hives, buildings, holes in the ground, wherever. And generally, they're living with very little to no human intervention. So our aim with Honey Bee Watch is to develop nature-based solutions to lower the mortality rates of managed colonies, to increase beekeeping sustainability, and most importantly, and ultimately, to protect the threatened wild populations around the world. We've been around for 6 years, and in that time, with the help of our research partners and participating citizen scientists, we have identified more than 2,000 nest sites on 5 continents, many of which are viewable in our mapping platform. Today, you're going to hear about our work with IUCN, which has been something that we've been working on for quite some time. We're also part of a consortium called FreeBee that was awarded a €1 million grant from Biodiversity Plus through the European Commission. And that money is to support extensive study for 3 years of free-living colonies, which I might refer to as FLCs in the future, so just mind that. And we're going to be doing that research, we are doing that research in France, Ireland, Poland, Portugal, and Sweden. We talked about this last year in March of 2025, and if you're curious about that, you can watch the video, or you can learn more about the study and even participate as a citizen scientist on the website. So that is Honey Bee Watch in a nutshell. What I'd like to do is just quickly present a brief introduction to the Symposia series in general. As I said, we're in our 4th year. Our primary goal was to bring this free-living honeybee community together so that our experts, our guests, could meet one another and exchange their expertise and their knowledge, for you to get exposed to their work, for you to connect and interact. Sometimes these chats are very lively, so we encourage you to interact with one another. And of course, to explore relevant and challenging topics. And so that brings us to today's program, our first symposium of the year, that's titled IUCN Red List, Wild Honeybees Labeled Endangered in EU. As you'll hear, Honey Bee Watch pulled together 14 bee scientists to reassess the red list status of wild Apis mellifera in Europe. Previously, they had been categorized as data deficient in 2014. Back then, there wasn't much data that had been collected on the FLCs. However, in these intervening years, many independent studies have located them, started monitoring them, and have learned much more about them. So we saw an opportunity to bring these folks together, along with citizen scientists, to collect more data, pool our resources, and work together for their eventual protection around the world. And one early kind of dream of Honey Bee Watch was to update this data deficient status, which we did in October and which you'll hear more about right now. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first guest. It's an honor to welcome Denis, who was not part of our task force, However, his role was much more impressive. Not only was he our liaison with IUCN, but he oversaw more than 2,000 other assessments or assessments of other, more than 2,000 other European bee species, which entailed managing something like 90 scientists. He's a professor at University of Mons in Belgium, where he develops studies to globally understand the diversity and conservation of bees. He's been involved in many multinational bee-related projects such as Epic Bee, Wild Posh, Posh Bees, Safeguard, and others. And today he'll introduce the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species, as well as give an overview of the European Red List of Bees report, which was published in October. So, Denis, if you are ready.
So thank you for the introduction and thank you for the invitation and the organization of this event. I'm not part of the community of the honeybees, but my father is a beekeeper, so I've been always in touch with the honeybees. Even my team is really working on the wild bees and more general on the wild pollinators. And so I was the coordinator of this enterprise of reassessing the European bees. And of course, I was not alone. There was this team of the honeybee specialists led by Honeybee Watch. But we had also a lot of other national champions and alpha taxonomists. And I put just here two other names, Mira and Guillaume from my team that supported me. But in the end, for the final report, we are more than 80 co-authors, so I will acknowledge them and the end. So it's me, but I'm representing here. Um, as you are more used to the honeybees, I still put some slides to illustrate the diversity of the bees. So behind the name bees, there is a clade. So of insect Hymenoptera, they have pollen diet in comparison to the ancestor, the wasp, that they have a carnivorous diet. So they decided to be vegetarian. And this group is highly diverse in terms of species. There are like 20,000 species described in the world. We have 2,138 species recorded in Europe. And in countries like Belgium, where I come from, there are 400 species. So if you compare a bit to the rest, like mammals that we are, there are a bit more than 5,000 mammals, 5,000, 6,000 species of mammals, and 20,000 species of bees. So there are 4 times more bees than mammals. So it's pretty successful clade. So this evolutionary success is associated to a big diversity of behavior, diversity of size, color, and phenology and relation to host plants. But you can also have some convergence of size, also on color, because they sting, and so they sometimes look the same, which can be a bit complicated in terms of taxonomy. So these bees, these wild bees, like the honeybees, they are exposed to threats that result from the activity of Homo sapiens. And the main threats are the same for everybody. So the land use change, of course, and in this category of threats, the intensive management of agriculture, it's a big one, including the pesticide, of course. Climate change for many group of bees is a threat. It's a bit more balanced here because some of the bees are associated to xeric climate. So some of the bees can win with this climate change, but overall there is a negative impact. Of course, some disease also that can threat the bees, and there we can have potential problem with the management of the honeybees because there are some spillover of parasites from the honeybees to the wild bees, but also on the other side. And of course, some pollutants. I mentioned the pesticide associated to agricultural practices, but you can have also heavy metals or microplastic and phthalates associated to the microplastic. So they are heavily exposed to this toxicity. So we know that they are threatened, but we need some evidence-based evaluation of the status of this huge diversity of bees in Europe. And one of the classical methodology to use this status is the methodology developed by IUCN, so the Red List. There are advantages and disadvantages to this methods, of course. One of the big advantages is it's a methodology that is used for every groups of organism, from the plants to the invertebrates, and everywhere in the world. So you can compare the different assessments between the different groups. The disadvantage is most of the criteria that are used there are from studies of vertebrates, like criteria that you evaluate the population size, which is always complicated for groups like invertebrates that are very diverse and the monitoring is not so good. So this is the different status that you can have after the assessment, and this status is based on different criteria. I will not go into details into the criteria that we use, but basically there are criteria associated to the distribution and criteria associated to population trends. So we had to evaluate this wild bee fauna at the European level, and Europe, it's always complicated as a definition. And here it's one of the definition, the IUCN definition, where you have this map. You have at the east, the boundary is the Ural mountain. We don't take Kazakhstan, and we don't take the south of the Caucasus. We take the European part of Turkey. Then the south limit is the Mediterranean basin, and the west is limited by Atlantic. We include Mediterranean island like Cyprus and Atlantic island like Canary Islands. So this is the place where we had to play. Like Steve mentioned, we already did this work in 2014 for all the bees, and we had two main results, two take-home messages. The first one is that we don't know much. So 56% of the species have been assessed data deficient, including the honeybees. And so it means that, okay, we don't know much about the wild bees, and most of these species were from the southern part of Europe, where you have a high diversity of species, but a low abundance of experts. So this result of a high percentage of data deficient for the southern part of Europe. And we had 9% of the species that they consider as threatened or nearly threatened. So this report is available online. Then from that, it was the base, of course, with all the data that we already got there. We had around 1 million records for the full fauna. And we went back to the specialists, the taxonomists, and sometimes also to the museum to digitize all this information to try to unlock a maximum of data. And we increased significantly the amount of data from which we will do the assessments. So we moved to almost 6 million data. Here it's a figure that comes from an article that we just published a few weeks ago, a data paper where we pulled all the data, the spatial data from the wild bees and the spatial data of the hoverflies. And as you can see on these slides, we managed to have 97% of the bee fauna with a map. So it was a huge progress in this, including the wild honeybees. So this is the result for just a few of them, just to illustrate the distribution of the information and the variation of the distribution for the species. So you have widespread species like the Halictus rubicundus on the upper left. You see that this species is basically everywhere. And then you have species that are more limited in the south. Like I mentioned, the center of diversity of the bees is in the south of Europe, and even a more restricted distribution like southwest Mediterranean basin or southeast Mediterranean basin. And I didn't put it here, but you have also endemic species, for example, in the different islands of the Mediterranean. Even if we did a good job regarding data collection, aggregation, validation, we still have some holes. And here I show you three maps of bumblebees. And even for these species, they are quite well known, the best known for the wild bees. We still have some missing data, especially in the east part of Europe. But this data, nonetheless, we were able to use it for other research paper, like evaluating the trends of population of bumblebees. And so on the top of the spatial gap, we have also, of course, some taxonomic gap. Some groups of wild bees are much more represented in our databases. Typically, the bumblebees, we have much more data than the respective diversity. So to read these slides, on the external part of the donut, you have the representation of the diversity, the species diversity of the different groups. And in the middle of the donut, you have the percentage of the data. So you can see in the bottom that bombini, which are the bumblebees, you have a lot of data, but you have a few species. Compared to the megachilid, that they are light green on the top right, you have a lot of species, but a few data in the dataset. So these are the main results that I will present here. So on the left, you have the first assessment of 2014, and on the right, you have the assessment of 2025. What you can see from the first side is that the data deficient species reduced from 56 to 14%. So it's a huge success. And also the good news, because sometimes we have also good news, is that most of the species that they were data deficient were actually least concerned. In terms of percentage, we increased the percentage to 19% of threatened and nearly threatened species, and we are almost at 10%. We are at 10% for the threatened species. But if you compare to butterfly and sylphids, bees are still a bit better, I would say, for the wild bees. So 10% for the bees, 15 for the butterfly, and 30% for the hoverflies. But if we focus on some of the bees, they are much more at risk of extinction. Here is the bumblebees, where we have almost half of the species of Europe. They are threatened or nearly threatened. So it looks like the social species, like the bumblebees and the wild honeybees, are particularly threatened. So if you want to know more about these results, we have this publication that is available online. I put here the full reference with a DOI, and you can always contact me, of course, if you have any question about this, and I can make this presentation available, of course. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Great presentation and nice introduction to the Red List and what's happening in Europe with these 2,000 plus bee species. So glad